Hey y'all, how you doing? And welcome to week 2 of What to Listen to Wednesdays, where y'all recommend me a piece of music to check out, and I recommend one to you. Sorry if I seem to be a little bit out of breath, I just got back from a training run for 5K season. Because, you know, if there's two things that go together, it's running a whole bunch and eating a small village's quantity of food. Anyways, y'all recommended me a whole bunch of music to check out this week, and I liked a lot of it. But the one I wanted to highlight this week was actually recommended to me by my cousin Bryson. He recommended to me that I check out the 2022 album Preacher's Daughter by Ethel Cain, who is an artist that I've meant to get around to for a long while, so I figured now was my excuse. So first off, I want to say that this album has a lot of impact, and obviously I mean that emotionally, but also almost physically, as the instrumentals on this album are all about atmosphere building. The instrumentals tend to be a lot slower and more subdued, becoming louder and noisier and more chaotic as the main character of this album deals with her emotional pain. Which, if you don't know, Ethel Cain is a character. I can't remember the actual name of this singer-songwriter, and I'm not looking it up. That would be research. But this character does seem to be, over the course of this album, leaving home, encountering various strangers on a journey out west, having her heart broken, ultimately surrendering to the forces of the universe, basically. It's all brought together under the canopy of Ethel Cain's voice, which brings in these Lana Del Rey, Florence Pugh vocals that, again, paint a picture all their own. They're big without her showing off, and emotionally tinged, but never in a performative way, never in a chewing the scenery kind of way. I think it's really worth noting the contrast of her voice between, like, A House in Nebraska, where she basically quietly tells a story for most of the song, and she's clearly in a lot of pain, and feels a lot of regret. But then you get Ptolemaea later on the album, and that track is just a state of mind. It's built around what feels to me like a late night panic attack. And towards the end of the song, she just screams stop, with the instrumental and the guitar swelling in this huge crescendo of a frickin' explosion. I don't know. She knows how to use her voice like a freaking precision weapon, man. What I really found interesting, though, was that while this album is called Preacher's Daughter, and it was recommended to me on the back of how last week I talked about how Lou Ridley on See You Soon talks about how religion has been used to subdue and oppress women in the South, Ethel's relationship to religion on this album doesn't seem to necessarily be antagonistic. She's clearly lost her faith. She makes references to seeing Jesus as a human being, how he wouldn't be able to escape his blood, and if he saw it on his hands, he'd probably cry. She makes reference later in the album, and I can't remember on which song, to praying to God and him either not answering or not being willing to forgive her. So, like, there's clearly a loss of faith there. But the journey on this album isn't so much about the evils of religion as it is feeling lost without it, as it's clear that the character of Ethel is still thinking a lot about her origin story. She makes a lot of references to how her daddy raised her, to essentially not be weak and to stand up for herself and fight back if she faces adversity. But then as the album goes on, she keeps falling in love with these people who mistreat her and misuse her, and she's kind of wandering all over the American West, and it's clear that she doesn't have a direction, with the album featuring her accepting her own hopelessness, which I think is very true to life. I know plenty of people who were raised in the church and who fell away from their faith, and whether or not you think that's a good thing, I think that people do get left with a sense of wanderlust, a sense of purposelessness, because at that point they have to make their own way in the world. So all of that to say, if you're in the mood for an album about the banality of the slow descent into chaos that is becoming an adult and moving away from your family and the institutions that brought you up, then good news, this album's for you, I guess. Also, can I give you a hug? Genuinely, no. This is a powerful, intense experience of an album, and it made me cry. And I think that if a piece of art can do that, then it's doing its job. So, good recommendation, Bryson. Speaking of albums that are about the horrors of becoming an adult, let's talk about my recommendation for the week, Worry by Jeff Rosenstock. Jeff Rosenstock, if you don't know, has been on the scene for decades. He's been a punk, ska, pop punk type guy the whole time. He's made his name as a workhorse in the industry. He's constantly making music. He's constantly working to make that music available to more people. He keeps his concerts as cheap as possible. He makes his own merch. He boxes it up himself. And he does all of this, or has done all of this for a long while now, while also making all of the music for the cartoon Craig of the Creek, which is just very cool. I love it when musicians are behind cartoons. So in other words, Rosenstock is a punk kid who grew up into a punk adult legend. And that life journey definitely influenced this album, Worry, as the whole album is more or less constructed around the shock of one day realizing that you've grown up and all of the parties and the chaos and the passion of growing up feels a lot smaller and more distant, and now you've got to take ownership of your life. The opening track, We Beg to Explode, is one of my all-time favorite songs. It's quite literally about reminiscing about house party culture and jumping up and down trying to make floors break, about burning the candle at both ends and just trying to wear yourself out, and then realizing one day that you did wear yourself out, and now you're like in your 30s. Same goes for Staring Out the Window at Your Old Apartment, a song literally about driving by either yours or an ex-partner's apartment and looking inside and seeing that someone new lives there and they've redecorated and it no longer bears the scars and the cool decorations that you put up. It's a song about accepting the flow of time and recognizing the need to move forward. But then there's also I Did Something Weird Last Night, which on its surface is a song about getting together with a girl at a house party and sort of having this crazy love affair on campus. And I love that in the moment, in the context of the song, it all feels superfluous, but then you find out that it's actually the story of how Rosenstock met his now wife, which in other words kind of flips the narrative of the album on its head. Some of the things you do as a stupid punk kid won't matter, but some of it will, and some of it's actually going to turn out to be pretty good. Then there's meditations on how capitalist society takes and uses your identity to its own ends, turning you into a piece of the puzzle, with tracks like Festival Song saying you wouldn't be a friend if you weren't worth something, or tracks like To Be a Ghost meditating on how social media literally sells who you are to other people for profit. And a suite towards the end of the album that's just sort of composed of all of the frustration at living in the middle of a chaotic, greedy society, but that all culminates in the final song on the album, Perfect Sound Whatever, and its chorus of perfect always takes so long because it don't exist, which is both a scary and yet uplifting concept because yes, you're never going to get it completely right, but also there's comfort in that idea, in the idea that everything you do is always going to be a little bit imperfect, which means that it just has to be perfect enough for you, which is, again, I think really valuable coming from someone who has built his entire career around being not perfect for other people, but for himself. It rocks hard, it hits hard emotionally, and it reminds you that it's okay to be a dork who grew up. And that's pretty cool. So yeah, y'all's homework this week, after celebrating, however you do, to check out Worry by Jeff Rosenstock. And while you're at it, let me know what I need to listen to this next week once the turkey is done. What should I listen to? What songs? What artists? What albums? Hit me up, and let's go from there. I gotta figure out a sign-off. I got nothing. The hey y'all thing is a solid beginning. I got nothing. Maybe just bye y'all? Bye y'all.